So, what actually keeps clinical trials safe? When we think about major medical breakthroughs, we usually picture brilliant scientists working in state of the art labs or brave patients volunteering for brand new treatments. But behind the scenes of every single successful ethical clinical trial is one incredibly specific, heavily relied upon document. It's not a fancy piece of lab equipment, it's a meticulously crafted text that literally acts as the bridge between raw, complex science and human safety. And that document is called the Investigator's Brochure, or the IB for short. You can really just think of it as a massive, comprehensive dossier. It holds all the vital clinical and non-clinical information about whatever investigational product is being tested. Its absolute core purpose is to be that literal bridge from pages and pages of raw research data over to practical, real-world clinical application. It takes all that scientific evidence and translates it into trusted, actionable guidance that investigators can actually use when they're treating human patients. Welcome to this explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining me today because we are going to dive deep into the architecture of this ultimate clinical trial survival guide. We'll be exploring insights from the Master Guide to Writing Effective Investigators Brochures, sourced from Everblink Health Care, to understand exactly how this blueprint of safety is constructed from the ground up. To keep things organized, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to cover 1. The clinical trial bridge, 2. Anatomy of the brochure, 3. The art of clarity, 4. It takes a village, and finally, 5. Evolving data and safety. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, the clinical trial bridge, focusing on clear communication. Because here's the reality. Without crystal clear communication, even the most groundbreaking science simply cannot be safely applied to humans. That is exactly why the INB matters so much. Clinical investigators lean heavily on this document during a study. A well-written INB supports ethical trial conduct, it improves the overall understanding of the trial protocol, and it actively assists in monitoring patient safety. Plus, it ensures that no matter how many different trial sites are operating, everything is done consistently. On top of all that, regulatory agencies heavily scrutinize the INB. They use it to figure out if enough information has been provided to actually justify exposing humans to the product. It's literally the foundational justification for the entire trial. No INB, no trial. Moving on to Section 2, Anatomy of the Brochure. Let's look inside the IB. So how do you even begin to organize all that dense science? Well, formats do differ slightly depending on the trial, but most IABs follow these 5 essential steps. Step 1 sets the stage with the introduction. Step 2 gets into the physical and pharmaceutical details. Step 3 dives deep into the non-clinical findings. Step 4 covers the clinical data in humans. And Step 5 gives concrete guidance for the investigators. Now, this isn't just a basic table of contents. Actually, scratch that. It's really more of a highly progressive, practical survival guide. If we break these sections down a bit further, you can see how the document moves chronologically, starting from early concepts all the way to practical human application. The introduction gives you the therapeutic indication and the mechanism of action, basically the why and how. Then physical and pharma covers things like storage, stability, and formulation, which is absolutely crucial for handling the product properly. After that, the non-clinical section summarizes all the lab and animal pharmacology and toxicology. Then we hit clinical data. This is often the most heavily scrutinized section, detailing human safety, dose response, and adverse events. And finally, guidance takes all of that prior information and translates it into actionable steps, like dose administration and risk management strategies. Let's move to Section 3, the art of clarity, where we'll see why readability matters. Now, there is a massive myth in the world of regulatory writing. People often assume that packing a document with dense, highly technical language automatically makes it a higher quality piece of work. But honestly, the exact opposite is true. Strong IB writing relies on straightforward language. It strips out unnecessary repetition and focuses purely on clinically relevant information, the stuff that directly impacts patient safety and trial conduct. You have to remember, investigators are wading through massive volumes of documentation every single day. A clear, readable IB saves them precious time and actively prevents dangerous misunderstandings. Which perfectly tees up a concept from the source material that I absolutely love. Visual organization makes complex data easier to interpret. It's funny, we're actually applying that exact principle right now in this explainer. Just like we're using slide structures to make this source material digestible for you, medical writers use specific formatting to make complex clinical data digestible for investigators. Writers have to deploy very specific structural tools to pull this off. They use tables to untangle complex adverse event reporting. They use flowcharts to visually map out how a study progresses. They use bullet points to make sure critical precautions jump off the page. And perhaps most crucially, they maintain rigorous, uncompromising consistency in their terminology, patient numbers, and dose information throughout the entire document. Why? Because even minor inconsistencies across these sections create confusion, and that confusion can lead to massive, costly delays during regulatory review. This brings us to Section 4. It takes a village, looking at the cross-functional team behind the document. Because building a document this complex and critical, that is rarely an isolated effort. You can't just hand this to one person in a cubicle. Developing an IB takes a highly diverse team. You've got medical writers handling the scientific communication and formatting, clinical researchers bringing the practical data and real-world insights on trial conduct. Your pharmacovigilance teams are absolutely essential for safety monitoring and assessing risks. Regulatory professionals are there to make sure every single word meets strict compliance standards. And biostatisticians? They ensure the data interpretation is 100% accurate. Every single group adds a vital layer of expertise. This cross-functional collaboration isn't just nice to have, it is mandatory to verify the data and guarantee the document's scientific accuracy before it ever sees the light of day. Finally, let's look at Section 5. Evolving data and safety. The challenge of continuous updates. Writing that initial IB is a huge achievement, for sure, but the job definitely doesn't end once the trial kicks off. Clinical data evolves incredibly fast. As a trial progresses, brand new safety findings emerge, risk assessments might shift entirely, and a ton of additional trial data needs to be integrated. So keeping the IB current is this ongoing, high-stakes responsibility. And here's where it gets really tricky. Writers have to constantly update the document with all this required new detail, without tipping the scales and turning the brochure into an unreadable, overwhelming brick of text. Striking that perfect balance between comprehensive detail and actual readability is one of the toughest challenges in regulatory writing. And that leads us to this incredibly powerful takeaway from our source text. Medical writing directly supports patient safety and research quality. Crafting an investigator's brochure isn't just checking a box or doing administrative homework. It demands incredibly sharp skills in scientific communication and data interpretation. It serves as a literal safeguard for human lives operating within a clinical trial. So, we've seen how the medical field uses this structured, cross-functional, meticulously clear documentation to bridge the gap between complex science and human safety. It really makes you stop and wonder, how might other highly technical fields, whether that's aerospace engineering, artificial intelligence, or renewable energy, benefit from this exact same blueprint of rigorous, clear communication? If this kind of clarity can literally save lives in a clinical trial, what massive problems could it solve in your own industry? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today, and I'll leave you to ponder that question.